Welcome back, everyone. And we are on part 2 with Erin's story. She has had what an eventful story taken place. And we last left off when Erin was sharing with us the experience of, now, Erin, would you say that the name of the procedure again? The lung lavage?
Whole lung lavage. And I think at the time I thought it would be like having my wisdom teeth out. Like I thought I'll be in and out of the hospital really quick. I was not prepared for the intensity of that procedure.
I can only imagine. I think, I'm not sure if you got to share last time. I think so. You were talking about how afterwards, I think you said, correct me if I'm wrong, you end up with no broken ribs, luckily, or did you say you have some? You end up with none,
No,
right?
yeah, I
Um,
had none, and it's actually quite common to have to have your ribs broken, but
but
I
you
don't
said you
know. I
did.
dodged that one.
Yeah, but definitely. But you had mentioned that you did have just bruising, and I can only imagine the pain that existed afterwards. Roughly, how long did the intent the pain that was caused from the pressure? How long did that pain take to really begin to subside?
Well, I mean, initially when I was in the hospital, after they had to do both sides of my lungs separately because my body was quite weak and they weren't sure if I would manage or if I would survive having both sides of my lungs done at the same time. So I had to wait a couple days in between. I did notice like improvement in my breathing right away, but you're right, the intensity of, they're doing compressions, they're hitting your body over and over again, trying to loosen up this surfactant. And lungs are really delicate. That's why we have a rib cage. And so they're trying to hit your lungs hard enough to help loosen this up with this saline solution pumping through one half of your lung, and but not hit you so hard that they break all your ribs, or you have you get a hole in your lung. Because keep in mind, for over a year my lungs have been rigid, just because of this surfactant buildup. So it's both like a brutal kind of procedure because they're really just hitting you over and over again, and delicate at the same time. They have a lot of instruments to measure the fluid that's going in and the fluid that's coming out. They're measuring your oxygen rate and your heart rate like very close to your heart so that they can detect small differences and small changes and respond to that quickly. But in terms of like the recovery of my bruising, I mean, that took months for that to go away. It was bad
Mm,
bruising.
wow.
The pain of it, it's hard to say. Like, I don't actually remember the pain of it so much because I think I was more focused on some of like the emotional pain that was
Hmm.
coming up for me. So, I mean, physical pain felt way easier than some of the emotions that were popping
Wow.
up.
And that makes sense too. I was actually having that conversation with someone recently about we happened to the context happened to be about childhood trauma or child abuse and people experiencing that, and just having that conversation that, like, later in life, we forget the physical pain,
Yeah.
but that emotional, mental, psychological pains, those are the ones that really have that big effect. And for if anyone's listening, if you're catching this episode for the first time, make sure you just go ahead and check back. There's a part 1 where you can get looped in on the whole story. And this has taken place for, if you've been following the whole time, if you're just hopping in, this has taken place for Erin. She had a health condition with her lung that was a very rare health condition, very unknown. And the onset of her symptoms take place at the onset of the pandemic. So Erin is going through trying to get medical care when it's seemingly impossible at times, to get health for this condition that she has in her lungs while a pandemic has taken place. And we all experience this pandemic at some level. And some people, we have core values. Our core values are what is most important to us. And some people, and whatever I say, some people, it just the world, we're a society. There's people that were valuing freedom higher than they were valuing safety. And Erin, yourself being in a situation where safety wasn't a luxury, where you were in many situations closer than we would like to be to death.
Mhm.
And will you take us through a little bit of what was the battle like? What was it like for you inside? You were battling at some level. You were looking to protect yourself and seek medical help. And you had some of your friends, family, peers that maybe were sharing negative energy with you. What
Yeah.
was that like?
Yeah. Well, I think before the pandemic, I do, I still have quite a few friends who certainly value freedom very highly. Um, I unschool my kids, that's a style of homeschooling, and it's very much consent based. And so it's definitely something that I really value. But this experience, there might have, I don't know if I want to say there might have been a shift in my core values. I don't think that's true, but I definitely got to see that while I still really value freedom and I really want everyone to be able to make choices, that's something that I deeply wish for and wished for throughout the pandemic. But I was so desperate to receive medical care. And as I saw a lot of the people who were around me who were also desperate to receive medical care, I started to really question whether, holding freedom above, I guess like for me, it almost felt like a sense of community. Like I wanted everyone to value the lives of the people who were struggling to live. I wanted those people to matter. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to matter.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was one of the hardest things. When I first got sick, I actually thought that it was probably COVID that I
Mm-hmm.
initially had. And I thought that turned into long COVID. However, at the time, nobody was really like, that was a term that no one was really using or aware of. And it took, over a year and a half for it to develop into a lung disease, or at least for that diagnosis to start to take place. And during that time, watching how friends and family were reacting to COVID, reacting to, at first, at least in Ontario, at first it was requests to follow mandates. And then as things became more dire, our government never penalized people for not following mandates. They came really close. I'm sure that was super triggering for people, especially people who probably were really valuing freedom. They were probably really valuing freedom for a reason. But,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was so desperate for them to also see, I know you don't want to do this. I know that you're tired, but there's a whole bunch of us who really need you to step up right now and like keep masking, or, this Christmas, maybe don't see everybody. And that was part of the trauma for me, was looking around and seeing, people who are diseased don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And, or at least that was my perception, that they
Mm-hmm.
don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was really hard to understand and to make sense of, especially when it was coming from friends and family members. I think part of my learning around this, one of the first things that I I had to grapple with was really trusting myself. So when I was sick and I couldn't get a COVID test, I thought, there's a good chance it was still COVID. And then when I had ongoing symptoms and my doctor saying it's just stress, really needing to trust myself, this isn't just stress. There's something else here. Um, and I think that, having that self-awareness and then trusting yourself, I think that takes time. And yet we can't be so embedded in our own experiences that we can't hear the experiences of others. And I think that's kind of one of the overall messages that I got out of this. I had it before because of nonviolent communication work that I had done, but this was a really loud, obvious reminder of that.
I can only imagine, and literally, well, as best as I can only imagine because I don't know your side. But for everyone that's listening, whichever side of the fence you sat on during the pandemic, could you imagine being within inches or yards of your life and wanting to be seen, heard, and felt? I can do my best to imagine, but I only want to go so far with that journey of even imagining it. It's dark. It's dark. When you were in that place, so if you would, Erin, if you would go to imagine for us, so you just got done with the treatment. I mean, you're at this point in time, and you're physically beat up.
Yeah.
You're emotionally and mentally, metaphorically beat up.
Yeah.
You don't feel heard or considered or even valued as a human.
Yeah.
What were the tools? What were the techniques? How did you begin transitioning during that time, mentally and emotionally?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the shifts that happened was actually when I was in ICU, and I was, the nurses there said, we don't usually have people who are conscious in ICU. Like, you're very rare that, we're having a conversation with you. And one of the nurses said, I think I really, I know, I really wanted to go home. I was because of the pandemic and there was no space in the hospital, they had converted this storage closet into a ward style ICU. And when you talk about not feeling human, not mattering, that's what it felt like, being in this space where there was no running water, there was no sunlight. You couldn't visit with friends and family, like you couldn't have visitors coming in because of COVID restrictions. Like, all the things that make you feel human were taken away. And it was tough. It was tough hearing people, like hearing them go through their last breath right beside you. Or just hearing expressions of their humanity and their pain, of wanting, maybe I won't go into some graphic details here, but that part was really hard. And recognizing that, part of me was strategic. Part of me recognized I'm going to have to shut off some of this intake just to survive this. And I allowed myself to feel the bitterness, but I didn't stay there. And I think that's one of the keys that helped my mental health, was feeling the anger and feeling the frustration and the bitterness about, what people are being asked to do in the grand scheme of things isn't that big of a deal, at least to me. And allowing myself to get out some of the anger. People don't often think of me as a person who swears, but F you, getting it out. And And then having, like, once it's out, having some self-compassion about that.
Mm.
So the self-compassion of like, yeah, I was feeling that bitterness because I had a deep need to matter. And I really wanted
Mm.
to matter to the people that I thought I mattered to. And right
Mm.
now they're having expressions of me not mattering, or at least that's my interpretation of it.
Mhm.
Um, but even being able to go there, being able to access that self-compassion and like that curiosity, like, oh, why did I react that way? Even before being able to go there, I actually needed to create safety. And so when I was writing my book, I wrote it the month that I got home from the hospital. And that was when I began to access some of that safety. I actually didn't feel all that safe in the hospital. So a lot of my journal entries from being in the hospital, um, there's a lot of swearing and bitterness,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
blaming,
Mhm.
blaming people for the choices that they were making. And
Mhm.
it wasn't until I got a sense of safety, and it took like months actually to like really be able to feel that sense of safety for me, but like returning to that safety, because you can't start to do that inner work, that getting curious about what you're feeling and what you're needing. You can't do that when you're feeling under attack or your needs are just so raw.
Mm.
You really need to be able to like take a breath and feel safe, to have that sense of openness with yourself. But getting curious about, wow, that was a big reaction I had. Um, not feeling shame or guilt around the thoughts that I was having, just recognizing, no, that came from a very real place. I
Mhm.
had some needs that every human has.
Mhm.
And I think that's something else that leaving the hospital, I'm thinking about that nurse in the ICU. I don't know if I circled back and finished that thought, but, as I was watching people around me, um, and I really wanted to go home, one of the things she said was, there's two ways out of ICU. One of them is going to step up care. You know, Going to step up care means you're getting better and you're out of ICU. You're not leaving ICU and going straight home. So get that out of your mind. You're going to be here for a little while. And then she said the other way of leaving ICU is you die. And so like having that reality, being reminded of that reality by, my neighbors in that ward not necessarily making it, um, it reminded me that not everybody is going to get to leave this place and be able to tell their story. And then even the people who do get to leave this place, not everyone is in a position to tell their story and to be heard. And yet I know after being here that everybody matters.
Mm.
Everybody who is in this ICU, whether they get to tell their story or not, whether they live or not, all of us matter. And all of the people who are really valuing freedom, I want them to know that they matter too. I
Mm.
just have a different perspective that I want them to consider.
Mhm.
And so being able to have that self-awareness, tapping into that curiosity, like self-acceptance of, the not so nice things that I was thinking or had to say, but then not getting stuck in the bitterness either, wanting that feeling of connection, wanting that feeling of, okay, if I had those bitter things to say because I was needing this, there's some people in my life who have said some bitter things to me right now.
Mm.
They're not bad people. They are in a position of deep needs themselves, and they can't hear me right now. And they can't access anything other than what's coming out of their mouth.
Mm.
And so the more I could access self-compassion and recognizing, oh, I was saying that really mean stuff because I had deep needs. They're saying that stuff because of their deep needs.
Mhm.
And wanting to wanting people to see that we're actually like way more connected and aligned than we might realize.
Mhm.
That was a real motivator, you know, knowing that if we're lucky, and when I say that if we're lucky, I mean if we're lucky enough to not experience violence throughout our lives that could possibly take our life early, we'll be lucky to grow old enough to get a disease. We'll be lucky to grow old enough to have um, an experience where, and I mean, it's not lucky. I don't wish this upon anybody, but it's a privilege to have good health, and it's a privilege to go a long period of time in your life having good health. And if you're lucky, eventually you will skirt violence in other parts of your life, and we'll all be humbled at some point in our life by coming close to death or dying. And understanding this, how our bodies work, our bodies are kind of amazing. They will do their best to keep living until the very last breath.
Mhm.
And this deep need to matter, we all have that deep need to matter. And the more we can understand our own personal perspectives, and then start to get curious about how someone
Mhm.
else's perspective might be different, we can actually do a better job of helping all of us have an experience within illness or dying that is more um, supportive, um,
Mhm.
mattering throughout our entire experience of feeling ill. I think that that's something that I wish for all of us. I feel like I'm
I
talking a little bit too much. I'll let you. I'll let you.
No, 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 absolutely not. I just want to. It was powerful. You said being curious about the other person. How far would society go if we did that? Like, think about just being curious doesn't mean we have because there's clear evidence in many a different ways. Your body language, your tonality, your choice of words, your energy. You've truly done the work on this, and for everyone listening, if it's not easy to um to feel attacked and then do the work and see the other person's side. And so for everyone listening, um that's a journey. Like, I just want to take a moment and realize that for Erin, powerful, powerful on your part. When you talked about being curious, I was like, wow, that's powerful. Being curious the other person, because neither, if we were to say sides, I feel like there's probably a better label, but I'm going to use that label for now. If we were to say either side, neither side was right nor wrong.
Right.
They were just a position.
Right.
Okay. And then if we think about both sides, but like if we think about the people that were, if people were curious as to, you've said, like, I value, you said, Erin, I value freedom.
Mhm.
I'm making an assumption, by the way, a projection here, assuming that people that are very, very bold had some type of experience where freedom is just like this absurdly high value for them.
Right.
And then if they were willing to be curious of your situation, and they didn't just have to be, you also of theirs, which eventually did the journey of your friends, your peers, cohort, they may have found out, if they were willing to be curious, as like, hey, why is this so important? Or why are you asking? What is it? And if they were willing to find out that you were, and I'm projecting, these are my labels, these are my words, so forgive me and correct them anywhere. But if they were willing to find out that you're afraid to die alone in the hospital, or God forbid, not even make it to the hospital, and alone in a sense that all of your friends are chanting something that is does not support your situation. And if they were willing to be curious just to find out that you felt that way, they may not even change their situation, but they may have been willing to offer a lot more compassion along the way.
That's an excellent point. And I did, once I was home and feeling safe, I was starting to reflect on that, because at first I felt so protective. Like I kept such a tight group of friends who I knew I could trust, because I was just feeling so vulnerable. I just lived,
Mm-hmm.
but emotionally I was super vulnerable. And so initially my little circle, my little world was really small. And I noticed that as I was branching out, the people that I felt safe to branch out to were not necessarily the ones who were using the strategies that I wanted them to use. Like, they weren't necessarily the people who were like pro mandates, pro masking. It wasn't necessarily that. It was who could hear me and see my humanity. In fact, I even stayed away from people that were like so staunchly pro mandates that they couldn't hear the other side, because that didn't feel quite right to me either. I didn't want to be right, in quotations. I wanted to matter, but in my mattering, it also means that everyone else gets to matter too. And so it was more people's capacity for compassion that felt safe for me.
Mm-hmm.
That was
Mm-hmm.
what created the safety. It wasn't necessarily agreeing with my strategies. Um, when I was feeling bitter, it felt really great to have somebody say,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, those jerks. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, like overall, I I wasn't it I didn't feel satisfied to just rest in a space of being right.
Mm-hmm.
It was such a strange time to get a disease. Um, I'm trying to think of the word, and if you think of the word, feel free to interrupt me and tell me what it is. Like, it felt like a dichotomous time, like everyone was taking
Mm-hmm.
sides. You were
Mm-hmm.
either with us or against us.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that experience of coming so close to dying and being in a room of people who were not necessarily going to make it, I just felt like, wow, we're doing this all wrong. We are doing this all wrong. At the end, like at when we are coming close to our last breath, it does not matter what strategy we're using. Like, right and wrong does not matter anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, if like I was scheduled for, I don't know if I told this story, but I was scheduled to have my whole lung lavage one night. And in the middle of the night, there was a code blue, and the hospital was understaffed because of COVID. So many staff members were ill, and the hospital was so full. And I heard the nurse yelling, "Code blue," and being woken up in the night and hearing that, um, and hearing the panic in his voice of like how serious this code blue was, and not hearing anything, not hearing footsteps, and my heart's pounding as I'm like, oh gosh, somebody next door is dying. And I hear him yell again, I said code blue, who's going to help me? Nothing, silence. It's this poor nurse is by himself helping this patient. And then a third time he yells out, and I mean, I'm sure everyone on the floor is awake now, like all of us patients are awake. And I think he even swore, like, can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, where the fuck is somebody? Code blue. And like, just the chill of this person next door, like
Mhm.
all of us on that floor, we all wanted to live. And the next day, my surgery was actually canceled because I lost my ICU bed to my neighbor. And someone asked me, would it matter to you if, like, does it anger you that now you have to wait again to have a surgery to prolong your life? And my answer was no. We all want to live, all of us. In fact, I think that's one of the connecting pieces that I could see so clearly. You know, the people who, or some of the people anyway, that I knew who were so staunchly against vaccines, it was this deep fear that that was going to kill them. And, you know, I have maybe a different perspective on science and medicine because of my education, but man, I get that deep fear. And, you know, just being reminded, we all want to live, we all want to be okay, we all actually want freedom too. It feels
Mm-hmm,
crappy to
mm-hmm,
have things
mm-hmm,
forced upon you. So we're far more aligned than we
mm-hmm,
might
mm-hmm,
realize.
mm-hmm. That's a powerful statement. That's a powerful statement for everyone listening. We are far more aligned than what we realize, and you know, that's not the first situation that ever played out, and I'd love for it to be the last one. But there's situations that play out in society where we feel that it is very important to, you know, I think I was talking to someone the other day, and they were saying about, because I'm very, I think we have to have some steel poles. I think we have to stand for some things. That's what I think. But I was having I'm very flexible. Like I keep my steel poles like very few, like very few. Like these will be the steel poles. We'll ride these ones out, but everything else I might really. I have a belief that says, you know, it's all it's all, everything is context dependent. And when I say context dependent, I give the example of like, I share the example of like, if my son is, if my wife is taking a nap and my son is running around the house being loud, it's easy to want to say, hey, don't yell in the house. It seems like a fair command. But if 2 days later me and my wife are taking a nap and there's a fire, I certainly want him to yell in the house. So I look at things very context dependent. So I don't want you to yell right now because mommy's sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of a blanket. Okay. So I tend to be very context dependent on where I stand. And then I
Mm-hmm.
have a few steel poles. And I think that's important. And I was talking to a friend and they said, well, you know, you got to fight for something. And I said, well, I don't actually align with it. I don't actually align with it because it implies that a fight has to happen.
Yeah.
You have to stand for something,
Mm-hmm.
I think. But we don't have to fight for something. We don't have to. Yeah, go ahead, Erin.
Well, this reminds me, within nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg, he has this phrase where he says, hold on to your needs tightly. So you were talking about your steel poles, and I kind of imagine maybe those are representing these needs, but your strategies loosely. So your needs matter. Your wife's need for rest matters. The strategy for how she gets the rest, whether your son is quiet in the house or goes outside and does his screaming outside, those are strategies. So this idea of, like, yeah, you know, your friend saying, well, you've got to fight for something. I'm wondering if your friend is thinking, you know, you've got to hold on to your needs tightly.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I are both hearing, I'm aligned with you on the fight part. You and I are both hearing, yeah, but does the strategy have to be a fight?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can we have a way for me to hold my needs tightly and you to hold your needs tightly, and then figure out creatively the space in between us where our needs can both be met? I'd like
Yep.
to think that that's more possible than we realize.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the more we practice this idea of understanding what our needs are and then holding those tightly and not blaming each other for the needs that we're having.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Can we talk about
Yeah.
that for a second?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Well, and it's, it's just, no one's wrong. Um, we get, I'm included in this. When we get hurt, we can, like you said, blame the other person. Like, I hurt, it's your fault. My needs weren't met, it's because you had a need that was opposing mine.
Yeah.
I don't think that as a large majority in society, someone else that has a need being met, um, there's a chance that it has nothing to do with the need that's not being met for the other person. Um, but what you said, I'm included in this. We get hurt, and then we're like, they're
Yeah.
causing that because they're getting, and we look for someone that's doing better than us. So my
Yeah.
needs not being met, their needs being met, they're causing this.
Yeah. And
Um, Go
that's
ahead.
that's actually such a clue, right? And I think that was something that kept bringing me back into that curiosity. If I found myself blaming other people, even if they were impacting me
Mm-hmm,
by
mm-hmm.
their choices, if I found myself blaming other people, it was actually an invitation to get curious about, like, oh, I'm really hurt here. They were just the trigger to remind me
Mm-hmm,
of my hurt and remind
mm-hmm,
me of my unmet needs. They actually weren't to blame. They were just
mm-hmm,
out there getting their needs met, unaware of how I'm being impacted by their strategy.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I think that's one part of that self-acceptance piece, is recognizing, like, oh, when I go into blame, whether it's blaming outwards, blaming other people, or blaming inwards, blaming myself, when I go into blame, that's showing me an opportunity um, to get clear on what some of my unmet needs are. Like, I don't have to blame myself for feeling these things. I don't have to beat myself up, um, or blame somebody else. It's really just, oh, there's a part of me that wants some attention, that wants to be better understood. And then once you can, like, swirl that around a little bit and then feel at peace, then you can start to understand the other perspective that you were maybe blaming.
I
Um,
gotta. Oh, good, good, good.
no, go ahead.
I'm curious to know. So you were on some level of ascension before this whole pandemic and disease and journey kicks off for you. The journey kicks off, and I like to think sometimes that I don't know if this is true for your individual situation, but I like to think sometimes when things happen in our life, this is just how I choose to adopt this belief. When things happen in our life that aren't so fun. They're the less fun chapters. I like to think I've adopted a belief that essentially, universe, God, whatever your higher power is, that there's something that we need to do to go to the next level of ascension, and we don't have the audacity to do it. So sometimes we get a little nudge from the universe. And it seems like a not so favorable experience, but that not so favorable experience takes us into a place. It only seems not so favorable, and I don't know about yours individually this time. It seems not so favorable. Usually that nudge has to happen because we had enough resistance that we wouldn't have done it on our own, and then we end up going through it with the resistance.
Mhm.
And then when we're blessed, we have our awakenings. I would like to, out of curiosity, how would you verbally paint a picture for us? You were on some level of ascension before this. The journey takes place. You do this deep dive on self, and I mean deep dive. Like, I wasn't there. I didn't get to witness it, but of everything that I'm aware of, like, that wasn't an easy dive. Especially being really hurt and then being like, well, how am I causing this? That's a deep dive. Because of that, how has that since writing your book, how has your life evolved for you and for how you're serving other people?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, mm, when I think about I think one of the big aha moments for me, and this, like other people had this lesson before I was doing other lessons, but one of the things that this situation brought out for me was, um, crappy things happen all the time. They just happen. And um, there's nobody to blame. It might feel nice to blame, but there's nobody to blame. Um, and it almost, like, I don't want to say it offers an opportunity, because when you're in those crappy moments, you don't want somebody saying, oh, what have you learned from this crappiness? Like, that feels even worse. But these crappy things happen in life, and it is a chance to stretch yourself. And if you can't stretch yourself, no blame on you for not being able to either. Just means in that moment, this crappy thing happened, you actually didn't have the tools to do any stretching. You had tools to survive. Good for you. That should be celebrated too. You figured out how to just make it through. That's a huge thing in itself. I think people with PTSD don't get enough credit for just managing the next breath, the next step. And then there's the possibility of, resilience. So being able to go through a crappy situation and get back to normal, return to a state of normalcy. And I think that's pretty incredible too, that you were able to access resources in your environment, access, inner strength. But again, even that, I kind of think that's kind of out of our control too, whether that happens or not. And maybe you would disagree, but we were born into these lives, and we can only access what we can access in that moment. Our environment just may not have what we need in that moment to do what we would love to be able to do. But again, self-compassion.
Yeah.
And then there's this idea of growth, going through a really crappy situation and finding growth within that heartache. And for a while there, I thought I was going to go the PTSD route. I remember even telling my close little circle of friends, I'm on the edge, even I'm home, I've lived. and just thinking about it, and the fear of having to go back into the hospital, at that point in time, COVID was circulating, and they didn't know if I got COVID, would I die? So living with that fear, it was in the immediate couple months after being at home, I thought I could go PTSD like this. I'm on the verge. And then my husband did get COVID, brought it home from work, despite doing so many things to try to protect me. And I was okay. And so I think facing that fear kind of pushed me out of that realm of PTSD. Okay, I'm going to be okay. And then resilience, trying to go out and do some of the things that I used to do. And things are different now. For the rest of my life, I'm going to have to wear a mask in public. And, maybe I'll reach a point where I'll be willing to take more risk. But right now, I'm one of those people that if you see a person with a mask at the grocery store, you're probably like, oh, that person is being overzealous or is, we have judgments about people and the choices that they're making. And I'm now, recognizing how often I did that because now I'm one of the people who are walking around wearing a mask when nobody else is. So there was the resilience piece. And now I kind of think it's taken me over a year, but I'm like, I think I might be into a growth phase. So I'm
Mm.
not just back to where I was.
Hmm.
Now I've written this book and I want to invite everybody to find self-compassion. I want everybody to know what it feels like to be able to understand the person that you thought was bringing you pain and to see their perspective.
Mm.
Because when we can see their perspective, then it actually, like, we don't feel that pain anymore.
Mm.
We understand where they're coming from. And it's not to say like I'm so enlightened that I'm there all the time. I totally
Mhm.
get frustrated and angry and bitter and all of those things still. But the more I can dip into that, the more I swirl around in self-compassion, my capacity for compassion grows because I've done the inner work. And when that grows, I have more capacity to understand someone else and have compassion for someone else. And I know that feeling of, I see you. I see you. I see what you're doing. I may not agree with the strategy you were choosing, but I see your humanity.
Mm.
And that piece feels so good. I keep wanting more of that. And I want more people to experience that piece. And I
Mm.
think that's why I decided I'm going to be vulnerable and share my story in a book form. And I might receive, some messages from people who misunderstand my intention of the book or think that I'm blaming somebody, because I'm really not. I'm just trying to share my process
Mhm.
and what it feels like to like constantly be, going through that, like trying to make sense of things so that I can reach out again and try to
Mhm.
understand again. Not saying I have it figured out, not saying that I'm even good at it all the time, but I know that feeling now of connection to other human beings that I thought were bringing me pain.
Mhm.
It's a really nice place to be. I keep wanting more of that.
Do you work with people, be it one-on-one or any form of training, people that it's very um, do you work with people that have these situations in life where they feel harmed by someone else, and where you're able to help facilitate where they can create self-compassion, realize what their needs were, and then see the other person's side? Do you help facilitate that for people?
That's a great question. So before I got sick, yes, that was the work that I was doing. My favorite way to facilitate that work is actually in small groups. Um, and I was doing a lot of work with parents, for example. Parents show up and think, I'm struggling with my kid. And then, I know from my own experience that the more compassion we can have for ourselves, then the more
Mm.
compassion we have for others, whether
Mm.
it's our kid, our partner, a family member, a colleague, a friend, a neighbor, some other person in the
Mhm.
world that you have, projected all of your anger on. So I did a lot of that work before getting sick. And since getting this disease diagnosis, it's been just over a year. And I actually, for a long time, I felt too vulnerable. Like I don't know that I could like have capacity for other people. I might just keep getting my own stuff popping up.
Mm.
Um, but just recently, I've started to do uh, free workshops. I try to do them once a month where we take one NVC concept and we practice it together. So it's slow moving. I'd like to feel, healthy enough so that I can run, my small group facilitated course again. But right now I'm just doing the free stuff, which is also, it's also nice to do something free.
Mm. Oh, it feels so
Um,
good. Yeah.
yeah. And I love connecting with people and uh seeing that moment of that felt compassion, whether it's in them for themselves or like, I see the humanity of someone else. I love seeing that moment. So it's rewarding. It's something that I love to do. This is definitely work that I'm passionate about.
Mhm.
I've just been slow to return to the one-on-one and even group facilitated, that people pay me for. I think there's something that happens with a money exchange where I feel like I have to show up with less vulnerability.
Mhm.
And I know that's my own like head thing. I've even, part of my meta mentoring value statements are like creating space for me to learn and grow right along with the other person. And yet I recognize that if you're facilitating something, you've got to have your, I don't know, I need to be able to know that I can hold other people's stuff, even as my stuff might be bubbling up inside me.
Mhm.
And for a while, I felt too vulnerable to do that, but I'm feeling better. The releasing the book felt really vulnerable. And now that it's out there in the world, I'm like, oh, that wasn't so bad.
That wasn't so bad. By the way, for everyone listening, where can they get a copy of their book?
It's on Amazon and I don't even know will that show up. It's on
Right. Yep.
Amazon and it's called Finding a Himsa. And it's also, I'm just trying to think in the US, is it Barnes and Noble?
We have Barnes and Noble. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's on there too.
Beautiful.
So right now it is a paper copy or ebook, and I'm working on the audiobook right now.
Beautiful. That's powerful. And I thought, I mean, you're absurdly self-aware. You're gonna continue to be a incredible, if you choose, if you're called to it, just an incredible guide for people. Your self-awareness, your vulnerability, and your ability to self-guide is a little bit above what I've met with other humans, especially self-guide. You took we're all humans, right? We don't even have to,
Yeah.
yeah, so we're all vulnerable, we're all susceptible, we're all okay. And so in a moment where you are under mental, emotional, spiritual attack, in that moment, you literally did, you got it yourself through, okay? And when you got to the other side, you did the self journey work. Your ability to self-realize, and self-guide is extremely powerful. And as you continue to feel called to get back into guiding and leading others, I commend you greatly on I commend you greatly on saying, I'm not ready for a monetary exchange yet, or an exchange of energy that includes money. I am not ready for that yet. So what? And the word is yet. So what? Right? The
Mhm.
day you're ready for it is the day you're ready for it. There's nothing that
Right.
needs to be done right now. And you had the realization, you said, I am not ready for an exchange of energy with money involved. And the show goes on. I'm doing it for free.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think it's funny, I had been struggling with mattering, and I actually wanted to take the money part out of the equation and just be able to connect with people without that, muddling up in my mind. I really, I love, I know I said this already. I love connecting with people. I love hearing their moments of their vulnerability where like, oh yeah, I've been there where I've had that pain, or I've been, or maybe I've never experienced what you've experienced, but I see your humanity in that moment. I get why you did what you did, or chose what you chose, or reacted the way you reacted. I I love that feeling of connection. Um, Again, I think that we're so much more interconnected. We have
Mm.
so much more in common than we realize. And there's something really I'm going to use the word peaceful, but that's not quite the right word. Like there's something reassuring about being able to see another human being and see their humanity. You know, your ego just is not even part of it. It's,
Right.
it's being human to human just feels really healing for me.
Mhm.
So doing that work, and I'm calling it work, but like doing that work
Mhm.
together with others, um, I learn a lot. I get a lot out of it. I love seeing other people have those moments. Um, that feels like a blessing to me.
Mhm.
Wow, it's the best feeling.
What is the for those that are listening that are connected to your energy? Because people are yeah, for those that are listening that are connected to your energy, if they want to begin to participate in some of the free stuff you're doing, or just learn a little bit more about you, or connect with you a little bit more, where can we direct them? Where can they go to begin that journey?
Yeah, thank you. I can share my website, www.metamentoring, METAMONTORING. I'm always worried I'm going to mess that up. .ca. So I'm from Canada, .ca. And then I'm on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube with the handle Meta Mentoring. So on, for example, if you wanted to join my NVC monthly free offering, go to my website, sign up for my newsletter, and then I try to once a month send out an email inviting people if you want to join this group, just respond. Um, and right now, I'm kind of thankful that things are kind of quiet because it means that the people who the people who are showing up are really wanting to show up and be there.
That's right.
So
That's
it's
right.
kind of nice to have a quiet, slow pace right now at this particular point in time for me.
And for everyone listening, if you're looking for that deeper connection, if you're looking for that intimate experience, you just heard it. This is a group where we are not funneling. I say we. It's not me, Erin. People are not being funneled into this group. This group sits as an offering for people that truly want to go forth and do the work. So if you're looking for that kind of community, make sure you connect with Erin. It's metamentoring.ca. And if you're listening to the audio, you can check us out on YouTube. You'll be able to watch the video of recording of this. And we'll also have the links put right on there in the YouTube. So you can just click on them right there and access these websites. And if you're already checking us out on YouTube, you can download this episode on any of the major podcast streaming platforms so you can listen to us on your drives as well. Erin, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast and sharing your story. I appreciate you being vulnerable. I won't say it was a pleasure having you share your story. There was some like cringe moments for me. I was like, oh my gosh. I say cringe like I could feel it when I say cringe, emotional cringe. Like I'm like, oh, like want to reach through the camera and give you a hug. I appreciate your vulnerability to share your story. It was a pleasure to get to experience your heart a little bit.
Thanks.
Well,
That's really, thank you. Okay, first of all, thank you. That is such a lovely thing to say. I also want to say that you created an environment where it was safe for me to show up and be vulnerable. And your process created safety so that I could feel comfortable showing up exactly as I am, all the parts of me, not having to mask and try to be something other than who I am in this moment. So thank you also for what you created.
thank you. Thank you. Before we head out, Erin, I would you um whatever you're called to share, I always ask my guests to kind of give like a final thought or final words. and I give them a direction of what I'm looking for that to be, and I never know what it is in the moment. I just kind of go with what I'm called to ask of you, and then if you'll just share back whatever you're called to share back. So for those, would you share final thoughts or a final message with anyone listening right now that is struggling with resistance and resentment, in which another entity is involved and they feel responsibility or blame to the other side, and so this message is they're in the turmoil right now. What would be your words that you could leave them with?
um See if you, so this is a little bit tricky, but it's that message of self-compassion, self-awareness. See if you can hear yourself and identify with emotion words like, oh, I just blamed somebody. What am I feeling? I'm feeling bitterness, I'm feeling anger. List them all, do the laundry list, then take a breath and see if there's anything else to add to the list. And then after you've listed the feelings that are behind this blame on the other person, see if you can identify what it was you're really needing that brought that on. Because that need inside you, first of all, I think it's beautiful. It's something like, this is what all humans have. These needs are common among all of us. And so if you can understand your need and then hold that with care, and then it becomes less about the other person. Then you can start to see like, oh, I was really needing this. That was maybe a strategy that I was getting mixed up in. I can see that differently, maybe, or maybe you can't. Maybe you just need to like, feel the pain of not like need feeling unmet. But I think that self-compassion piece is the starting point, that self-awareness that like, oh, I'm blaming somebody else here. And then, what is that about? And holding that with gentleness and care, because we're all human, and anybody else in your situation, in your environment, and everything else that you've experienced in life, they'd be reacting the same way too. And so having that self-compassion, of course I reacted this way. Of course I did that thing. Of course, I went in that direction. I'm human. And in that moment, that was the capacity I had. And now that I've had this self-awareness, in another moment, I might be able to choose something else. And that's powerful. Like once you get that self-awareness and self-compassion, then you can start to see things differently. And there's a lot of hope there.
That's very powerful. Thank you so much, Erin. If you guys want to connect more with Erin, make sure you check out the website. It's metamentoring.ca. And until the next episode, be great. It's already in you.